Good afternoon. This is Ed Majewski. I'm the director of the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. I will say I have a little bit of a head cold, so hopefully my voice will hold out. The good news is in this webinar format, you don't have to worry about germs being transmitted. I want to welcome you to this third in a series of bi-weekly webinars being put on by the Center for Urban Transportation Research at USF. Thanks for joining us. The subject of this webcast will be organizational structure of MPOs. The webinar presents the highlights of an 18-month study funded by the Federal Highway Administration. Topics will include the organizational structure of MPOs, staffing levels, specialization of staff, workforce turnover, and the governance of MPOs. The webinar is intended for MPO staff or others interested in MPOs, such as state DOT personnel, local government transportation planners, and consultants. Participants will learn how to benchmark their MPO to others nationally. Further, participants will learn about innovative solutions to common MPO staffing and planning problems. This webinar is free for all who want to participate. One AICP-CM credit is available for this session. However, to obtain AICP credit, each individual at a site will need to complete an evaluation form for the webinar. Some of you may be unfamiliar with the USF Center for Urban Transportation Research, so I'm going to take just a very few minutes to introduce CUTR. CUTR was established in 1988 by the Florida legislature, and of course our focus is on applied research, technology transfer and training, and we also assist quite significantly in the education mission of the university. CUTR has a very multidisciplinary staff, and many of our staff have what I would characterize as real-world experience. Many come to us with 10, 15, 20 years working in either the private sector or public agencies. At any given time, we have over 100 active research projects, and we do about $8 million a year in contract research and grants. About $3 million of that is federal. We have about 45 full-time research faculty and employ about over 20 student researchers on a continuing basis. I think many of you have found that those students, once they graduate from USF and leave CUTR, are fantastic employees for you out there. We've had a long history of working in the area of MPO planning. Many of you may be familiar that about every 5 years we get asked to do a review of the various MPO plans in the state of Florida, and it's been really a good way to be able to identify the best practices from among different MPOs and to be able to help spread the word about those practices. And so we hope that we've been able to help advance the state of MPO planning across the state of Florida. An outgrowth of that has been we work fairly extensive with the MPO Advisory Council here in Florida, and we've created what we call the MPOAC Institute. Basically what it's designed to do is take elected officials who are newly appointed to MPOs and to give them a kind of a boot camp, let's call it, of what's involved in participating in an MPO. And we've had very good feedback on that. Hopefully it's served a real purpose. Anyway, that's with that brief introduction to CUTR. I do want to, before I introduce the presenters for the webinar, I'd like to get a little bit of information about those who are participating. So if you could identify for us how many people are viewing the webcast at your location. And if you would just click the little dot on the side of the colored square, that would be fantastic. Okay, we'll give that another minute or two. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Okay, so it looks like the majority of people are watching it at their individual laptop, which is an interesting thing. It really kind of reaffirms to us how effective these desktop webinars can be. So let's go ahead and move on to poll question number 2. We'd like to have a sense of where you might be located in the state of Florida, the southeastern U.S. If you could just indicate the appropriate location by clicking on the little ball to the left of the squares, that would be great. Okay, let's go ahead and close that poll. And interesting, it looks like our audience is fairly widely spread across the country, with actually less than a quarter here in the state of Florida. And frankly, that's pretty fantastic for us. We're hoping that through this mechanism of these webinars, we can reach out and get participation from across the country. Now, I do want to say, I'm going to introduce the presenters today, but I do want to let you know that there'll be an opportunity as they make their presentation. There's a place on the screen where you can type in any questions you might have. We'll hold the questions till the conclusion of the presentation. But let me go ahead and introduce our presenters, Jeff Kramer and Alex Bond. Jeff is a senior research associate here at CUTR at the University of South Florida in Tampa. He researches primarily in the areas of MPO planning, transportation policy, access management, and public involvement. Jeff has published numerous papers and articles focusing on various aspects of metropolitan transportation planning. In 2005, he was the co-winner of the Charles Wooten Award presented by the Transportation Research Board for the best paper in the area of transportation policy. Jeff holds a master's degree in city planning from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and he's a member of TRB's Committee on Metropolitan Policy Planning and Processes, and also serves on the AMPO Technical Committee. Now, Alex Bond is also a research associate here at CUTR, and his research areas include transportation agency structure and performance, public involvement, intergovernmental relations, and transportation policy. Prior to joining us at USF, Alex held positions at the National Association of Regional Councils and at the Urban Land Institute. He holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Florida. He's vice chair for national planning of the Regional and Intergovernmental Planning Division of APA, and he's a member of the TRB Committee on Transportation and Land Development. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and Alex and Jeff will launch right into the substance of the presentation.
Thanks, Ed, and thank everybody for taking the time to come on out and some of you taking your lunchtime to listen in on us. We're going to talk today about a study that we conducted for the FHWA on MPO staffing, governance structures, and before I do that, I'm going to turn this over to Alex to give you a little bit on our co-sponsors today.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Just want to give some notice to everyone that CM credits are available for this session through our partners, the Regional Intergovernmental Planning Division of APA. This is the first of their webcasts, and there will be some in the future that are available only to members, so please consider joining up with our division. To register for your AICP credits, you'll need to stay through the whole event. APA makes me say that. And at the very end, there's a feedback form that each person will need to fill out. So even if there are multiple people watching on your one computer, each person needs to fill out that evaluation form. That's essentially our sign-in sheet. Then you'll be able to go to the AICP portal on planning.org and find our webinar using the calendar view probably and claim your 1 credit. Then give me about 48 hours to confirm that you were indeed there, and you can add that to your 32 CM credits you have to do every 2 years. So, Jeff?
All right. Thanks, Alex. We'll keep it moving. We're going to go ahead and conduct a couple of poll questions like Ed did. We're going to focus in a little bit. First, do you intend to claim AICP CM credits for your participation in this webcast? Go ahead and fill in the little ball next to the dot. It just gives us a sense of maybe why you came out here. You may want to hear what we're saying, and you may very well want the CM credit as well. We just want to get a sense of that. All right, Mel, why don't you go ahead and close that? So actually, I'm a little surprised. There's nearly 60% of you who are here because you're interested in what we're saying and not to get the CM credit. But for those of you who do, I think it's a good opportunity for you to do that. If we could move Mel to the next poll, it'd be great. Thanks. Just to get a sense of who you work for, could you go ahead and let us know what type of agency you work for? You know, we want to know if you're an MPO person, DOT, local government, who's not also MPO staff, or if you work for a regional council that is also not the MPO, and then we'd love to know if there are consultants in the audience. Okay, Mel, why don't you close that poll? Thanks. We got about half of you who are directly staff to an MPO or affiliated with an MPO, and about a quarter with state DOT. So we appreciate that participation, and for those of you not, we still are glad you're here and glad you're listening in and showing some interest in how MPOs have decided to structure themselves. Mel, if you could go on to the third poll, would be great. Now, if you're we try to create these questions so everybody could answer them. Just let us know what your role is with the MPO, or your staff or a board member. Do you serve on a committee? Are you liaison, or you know, do you have an MPO as a client, or you're just interested in learning more about MPOs? All right, Mel, why don't you go ahead and close that poll now? All right, thank you. Well, about half of you MPO staff, and a lot of you work for an agency that coordinates with MPOs, and so you're interested in learning what they do and how they do it over there, and I appreciate that perspective. Mel, if we could move back into the presentation, it'd be great. Thanks. Wanted to get a sense, we put in this slide not knowing who would be here. Sure does seem like most of you know what an MPO is, and I won't spend much time on this one. You know, it really is, you know, we're listing here how MPOs take a little, some money from the takedown from the federal highway programs. All urban areas in the country are covered by an MPO. There are 385 MPOs in the country, and we've got a real mixture. And following our work, we knew this already, but it was confirmed by the study that of the 385 MPOs out there, you are all very different from each other. Some commonalities, but a lot of unique conditions. So why did we conduct this research? The problem really was that MPOs have a very complex role. Your responsibilities are quite broad, ranging from air quality, transit planning, systems planning, very involved in public involvement, focusing on Title VI. And as we know, future authorization may be bringing us issues of performance measurement, global climate change, issues, and many of you fill unique roles in your local communities that other MPOs in the country might not be doing. And we know it's been expanding over time. As I mentioned, may grow with the next reauthorization. And your staffing and your organizational capacity is a real critical, plays a real critical role in your meeting your responsibilities and the expectations of your federal and state partners, your sister agencies in the area, and the public. And frankly, there's just not that much material out there looking at strategies for staffing and organizational capacity. Resources on MPOs are just relatively limited, and to date there hadn't been a national research of this size on MPO organizational structures and staffing. So that's the research problem behind it. So the scope was basically to do some basic discovery work on MPO practices, looking at organizational structures, staffing levels, what are people getting paid, what kind of turnover, how do you govern yourselves. I want to take a moment here to thank the Federal Highway Administration for funding this piece of research through the STEP program, and also to direct you for a downloadable copy of the report that came out of this research. If you just go to www.mposurvey.com, right there in the fourth bullet. Also, you'll notice on the top right of your screen, there's an icon that would basically look like 3 sheets of paper. You are able to download both this presentation in PDF format and a copy of the report. So while this is open, while you're here, feel free to click on that and download it, have a copy saved on your hard drive or wherever you would, your desktop, so you can peruse it at your leisure. Methodology and data collection. How did we find out what you all are doing? We used that same MPOsurvey.com website to conduct a roughly 3-month survey during the spring of 2009. For those of you that participated, you were asked several questions. They ranged in between 61 and 72 questions, depending on how you answered a question. So if you answered yes or no, you might be broken off in a different direction. So depends on the characteristics of your MPO as to how many questions you got. We did a fair amount of recruiting, trying to encourage people to answer. We reached out to the MPO community through newsletters, state associations, and direct solicitation. I just want to thank everybody, AMPA, NARC, and the TRB committee, 8820, for reaching out to their membership and asking them to respond. And we got a very good response. 133 of the 385 MPOs in the country responded. It's about a 35% response rate, which for any of you who do surveys, that's pretty good. Clearly statistically significant. So we had a pretty good feeling about the information we were getting. I should mention that in that survey, we had mouse overs so that you could get definitions. We can't control what everybody answers, so we may have had some outliers through some misunderstanding, but by and large, I think our data was really good in this case. From that, we created 10 case studies. We followed up with documentary review and interviews with those individual MPOs. Here's a map of where the survey participants came from. Hopefully, if you responded to the survey, you're going to see a dot over your urban area right now. We did have some clustering, a fair amount, I think, from Florida because we're here, and some other states where the state associations and contacts maybe strong-armed some of you into answering a survey, and we appreciate that. Also, we got a real good range of small MPOs, large MPOs, mid-sized MPOs, so we really felt also good about that data. The 10 case studies also cover that range from small MPOs to the very largest of MPOs in New York City. And we also had 3 MPOs in here that were formed in 2000 following the last census, and we're very hopeful that the information that comes out of this is helpful to those MPOs that are formed and will be formed following the 2010 release of urbanized areas from the census. So let's go ahead and move into the first section. I'm going to handle this first section, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alex after this. First, I'm going to talk a little about hosting and administrative issues. We're going to do a poll question here. So is your local MPO an independent agency hosted by either county or municipal government or regional council, and or is it another? Are you somehow not falling into one of these categories, perhaps hosted by a different agency than the three we've got posted there? We'll just leave this open for a minute and let you all have an opportunity to answer. Okay, Mel, why don't you go ahead and close the poll for me? Okay, looks like we have about 33% of MPOs on the line today, or your local MPO is what you consider an independent agency, and I will share with you the statistics that we got from the survey responses, how that adds up as we come up here. So what did we find? Really a wide variety of MPO organizational structures, and it actually it seemed to match up pretty well with the response we just got to our last poll questions. About 31% of MPOs that responded were considered themselves independent. Now we did have a definition of independence in our study for those answering. We considered that to be if you were both financially, fiscally separated from a host agency, or if the MPO director was administratively and directly responsible to the MPO board. We find the remaining MPOs are hosted in some way. As you can note, regional councils, and we provided a generic definition. So if you're a regional council, a COG, a PDC, if you're in Virginia, or some other regional agency, you fell into this category. About a quarter of MPOs in the country were hosted by a regional council, and then about 20 each for municipal and county governments. When you combine that, about 40% of MPOs are hosted by local government, which I think was an interesting finding here. We also noted that you were more likely to be hosted if the MPO was in a non-TMA, so smaller MPOs, smaller urbanized areas, probably not independent. And again, regional council was the most common host. And we did find that the larger urbanized areas tended to be those that were falling in the independent category. We asked what were some of the advantages and disadvantages of their hosting arrangement, whether they were independent or otherwise hosted. And this is a conglomeration of responses that we got in free response. So, we got very wide range of responses in here, and we're basically just summarizing what we found. And the advantages of being a hosted MPO, the biggest one, I think, overall was the lower overall cost. The cost of both administration, providing benefits to staff, having free or subsidized office space. That also includes things like IT services, fleet cars, printing, copiers, mail, you name it, made the overall cost of lower if you were hosted. The sharing of expertise was also very high on that list, so you had coordinated programs with other programs in the host agency. You had land use planners and transportation planners sitting nearby, and the sharing of employees. And this is particularly true of maybe GIS staff or receptionist, clerical staff, and other specialties that the MPO might not need to have on staff all the time, but they have easy access to. And then also the capital float issue. As we all know, the federal funds, federal categories for PL funds and 5307, 5303 transit planning funds are reimbursable. So how do MPOs meet their fiscal responsibilities? Who's paying the rent? Who's paying for the broken copier? Who's paying your staff are expecting paychecks every couple of weeks. So who's providing that capital float to keep you going, or you're waiting for the reimbursement to come from the federal agencies? Some disadvantages in the hosted arrangement were sometimes the responsibilities were blurred. Staff may or may not, and certainly not consciously, but sometimes it's hard to know, are you acting on behalf of the MPO or the host agency, whether that's the county or in our regional planning council at that time. Also the board sometimes gets confused. If you present to them in the capacity of county staff or host agency staff at one point, and then as the MPO maybe 10 minutes later, that can be confusing. The MPO is also subject to some host rules, budget oversight, and so some of you responding to the survey thought that was a disadvantage, that you didn't have direct managerial authority, autonomy over over every activity of the MPO. There were those that mentioned some policy interference and some unfamiliarity with MPO work on the part of the host agency. Let's move on to advantages and disadvantages of the independent structures. Not surprisingly, are the reverse, essentially, of the hosted structures. The advantages primarily being political and administrative autonomy and a clarity in the chain of command. The staff knows who they're working for and who they're getting direction from, and the board knows as well who they are talking to. There's also some who responded that they had a clear agency identity, and that this served them in that they didn't get caught up in any of the political or other interference that, or maybe some downfalls that might be associated with something that the host agency was currently involved in, and some cleaner finances, that you weren't being commingled with other funds and having to do your audits collectively and separate it out. Disadvantages, primarily cash flow problems. Again, we talked about the capital float, and coming up with matching funds was a particular disadvantage in the independent structure, and the higher cost of operation. You're not sharing costs with a host agency, and you're not benefiting from economies of scale this way. And also staff and administrative versatility was required. You're typically going to be a smaller staff, and frequently you found more staff wearing multiple hats and conducting public involvement, the GIS and modeling, all in the same person, because you didn't have some of that staff that the host agency could provide to lean on. So the conventional wisdom, we've always thought of MPOs as really two categories, either hosted or independent. And what we really found was, from our research, was you really kind of cover more of a broader continuum, running from freestanding MPOs all the way to what we called all-in-one agencies. If you've got a problem with how we defined any of these titles, we made them up, basically. So go ahead and let us know if you'd rather we called them something else. But this is what we came up with. I'm just going to walk very briefly through each one. Just freestanding MPO is about 10% of our pool of MPOs in our survey. They basically handle all fiscal and administrative duties completely on their own. They may contract with they might not have, say, an attorney on staff, but they're contracting for general counsel independently. They adopt their own administrative rules, and they have an independent board and director. And we give you some examples here on the bottom. I'm not going to read them to you, but they are also in the report, and so this gives you a sense of who maybe falls into these categories. Leaning independent, we use the term leaning in that they're independent boards and directors. They rely contract and grant authority services over independently, but they rely heavily on a member jurisdiction for services, and they do this through a contractual arrangement, they often mimic the personnel policies, contracting rules, and the salary bands of the host agency, but they often adopt those separately and independently from the host agency. Then we move into these hosting types, and we have these two, both component MPO, which is about 30% of MPOs in our survey, and dual purpose MPO, about 25%. And really the difference is these are both hosted. They're both essentially treated like departments of an agency, but in the component MPO, they generally do only MPO associated work, where on the dual purpose side, they really do the work of both the host agency and the MPO. So that's the primary distinction. And there's a couple others, but I think that's the way to really think about those two types. And then finally, we've got the all-in-one, what we call the all-in-one agency. It was about 10% of the MPOs. So usually those MPOs hosted by very large metropolitan councils, where they really have a difficulty in differentiating the MPO staff from other staff. They use the same logos, and they refer to themselves with the same terms, and they often cover the entire area. So the MPO boundary and the regional council area boundary are essentially the same. We also had some interesting others, if you will, about 5% of those that were agencies that were co-located with transit agencies. A couple of examples of that. We had one MPO who is staffed, hosted by the New Jersey Institute of Technology in North Jersey, and then a transportation authority in South Jersey, the South Jersey TPO, and a handful of still hosted by state DOTs, including NIMTIC in New York City. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Jeff. And moving into this discussion of MPO governance, this means the board size, composition, and voting rights. And we have some poll questions for you. You could bring those up. So we want to know how many seats are on your local MPO board. So go ahead and give us an answer. Okay, we can probably close the poll. When we pull up the statistics here shortly, you'll see that most of you fall right into the range of 9 to 15 members on your board. Very large boards, though, can be found. 12% of you say you have more than 25 members of your board. So we can move on to the next poll question. And we want to know, do all votes of your MPO board members count equally? This is sometimes called weighted voting. The weighted voting is often discussed as a way to balance out intergovernmental politics. As you can see, most MPOs have equal votes for each of their board members. You can close this poll. 80% responding yes. And our next poll is, we're wondering if any of your MPO board members have a seat on the board but don't have a vote. This is sometimes used as a way to give representation of the board to people who are otherwise not qualified to be on the board, and we'll discuss that in a few slides. And again, apparently all of you took the survey because we're coming in right in line with the survey. We can close the poll and move on. So in terms of MPO board sizes, they range in our survey from 5 to 73 voting members of the board. You can imagine those largest board sizes are very difficult to administer, but you can see the median number is 14. That is the dead center and more instructive to us than the mean or average. See, most MPO boards are not in that size of 73. The bottom quarter of MPOs have less than 8 members. The top 1/4 is where all of the large outliers are found. Our most common response was 9, and when you get into the actual composition of the board, you can see that MPO boards are dominated by municipal elected officials, meaning mayors, city councilmen, and township selectmen and so forth. Counties are also well represented through either county-wide elected officials like a county judge or through county commissioners. There are a number of seats, though, for state DOTs, public transit agencies, toll authorities, and these are all qualified in federal law to be on an MPO board. We did find some examples across the country of board seats being assigned to people that are not mentioned directly in federal law, some from the private sector, some from universities. That seems to vary from state to state. Now, in terms of board composition, the voting rights of each member did vary from place to place. There were several systems that we encountered. The most common is a one-member, one-vote structure. This can be set up so that each local government receives one vote on the MPO board. But more commonly, the number of seats on the board is capped, and then they are apportioned out to member local governments so that the larger local governments receive more votes. So this is not a weighted voting system. It is simply giving more votes to the larger jurisdictions. Weighted voting, which we defined as each seat having an unequal number of votes on the board, was relatively uncommon. We only found it 13.5% of our sample. And quite a few of our respondents reported that even though they had weighted voting in their bylaws, it had never been used. And this makes some sense. If you have weighted voting, so that may sometimes lead to a different political dynamic. It also speaks to the desire of MPOs to reach consensus in their region. As an MPO director, you probably don't want to bring planning documents to the floor that are going to be facing a divided vote. We encountered 27% of MPOs that have a rotating voting seat, and this was common in some states that capped the number of board seats. But this was often used to give rotating representation to a group of small local governments. So if there was a group of, say, 10 municipalities in one MPO area, they will get one vote that will rotate among the mayors of those cities year over year, with the idea that that person represents all of that group. We encountered a few other voting systems too. Consensus voting is found in a handful of places. Difficult system to move forward, and in this system, even one nay vote can make a motion fail. We also encountered the golden vote system, we're calling it. A handful of MPOs, there was one dominating local government, or even some, in cases, by state MPOs, where one member or a key member or a block of members could block a vote that had passed. Sometimes this was only allowed during the TIP process. Projects that were in one jurisdiction could be essentially vetoed by a member in that jurisdiction. Now, non-voting membership. This is an excellent opportunity for an MPO to give some board representation to those that are not listed in federal and state law. We found 63% of our sample had at least one non-voting member. Those that did have non-voting members had up to about 5 seats, but it was the mean of non-voting seats on their board. And these were used in a variety of ways. Probably the most common members of non-voting members of the board were the federal agencies, federal highways, and federal transit region. Other types of non-voting members included school board, rural transportation planning organizations, sometimes the state environmental agency, particularly in areas that are in air quality non-attainment. Some other modal authorities, so like a port authority or airport, and the Chamber of Commerce. We also found some examples of state legislators on MPO boards. This was in some of the northeastern states. So that brings us to the end of governance, and we have another section here. This is our last section, by the way, so keep the questions coming in. We'll answer them at the very end. on the MPO workforce. I'm going to talk about, we can start the polls, by the way. In this section, we're going to talk about the size of the MPO and the specialties of its staff and turnover rates at MPOs. So we want to know how many employees work at your local MPO. Okay, we can probably close the poll. We have a very even distribution of participants today. You can see that MPOs vary pretty widely. There's, and we'll talk about that range in a minute. We have another poll question, don't we? Yes, we do. Just speculation. Let's see who can nail it. How many people work at all 385 MPOs in the United States? We made an effort in a study to guess that amount. We have a pretty good estimate. And keeping in mind it can't be less than 385. So it looks like some of you have read the study, read our report. So we can close this question. And the correct answer, by the way, is 4,200. So those of you who answered 3,000 to 5,000, excellent job. So moving into number of employees, this graph looks kind of like the governance one, but don't let it confuse you. It's pretty different. We found the MPO employee staff sizes ranged from 121 at its maximum to less than 1 employee. Now, a dozen or so of our respondents answered a very high number. And this was part of what led us to uncover the idea of this all-in-one MPO. These were generally MPOs that reported all of the staff at the regional council as being MPO employees because they were so integrated that they couldn't differentiate between the MPO employee and the non-MPO staff. We did find, though, a handful of independent MPOs that had as many as 55 to 60 staff members. So MPOs can be pretty large on their own. On the other end, we had 5 of our participants who responded that they have less than 1 employee on staff. So you can imagine an employee or an MPO with less than 1 employee, that person has to wear quite a few hats. So just breaking down the distribution of employees, the median number across the country, all 385 MPOs, was 6 employees. That's 5 full-time and 1 part-time person. And a quarter of all MPOs had 3 or fewer staff members. So this versatility and specialization of staff is it's an interesting question for MPO leadership. You could probably guess this, though, that the smallest of MPOs had the fewest employees. And you can see that it spikes pretty dramatically at over 1 million. One reason for that is MPOs receiving a greater share of transit planning money. It's more common in areas that have, say, fixed guideway transit systems. But you can see even small MPOs can have a substantial number of employees if they leverage some funding sources beyond the federal government. So some statistics for you. Part-time employees are found at 73% of MPOs. This includes people who are working 20 hours a week, but it also includes those shared employees. So if you have a receptionist that works for both the Regional Planning Council and the MPO, that would be counted in this number at 73%. One handy metric we came up with is across the country, there is 1 MPO employee per 48,000 people in the planning area. And you can see when you add that up, that you don't reach about 8 staff members, about 400,000, and that number 8 is going to be important very shortly. We also found that the planning area square mileage was also related to the number of employees. That number I don't have off the top of my head. It was more useful to MPOs out west. And again, 4,200 MPOs nationwide. A handy figure from that, though, is that 850 of the employees are from non-TMAs. So we're finding that there is a large number of non-TMAs that are pretty strapped for workforce, and they reported to us for funding as well. We asked our respondents to click if they had any employees who were specialized in or specialize in any area of planning practice or information practice. And you can see the second column. This is the percent of MPOs who reported that they had an employee who spent 1/2 of his or her full-time equivalent in that area. GIS was the most commonly reported. Travel demand modeling was right up there at about 40% as well. These were things too, GIS and modeling, that are often contracted out to consultants. When MPOs get a little larger, they can start having a transit-oriented person. They can have a bicycle and pedestrian-oriented employee. And then about 1/4 of our MPOs had someone that spent half of their time only on public involvement. Remember earlier I said the number 8 at staff size was fairly important. That's when we start to see MPOs being able to specialize their staff. So when we get to that level, about 400,000 people, that's when MPOs are able to dedicate a person to, say, public involvement, or dedicate a person only to the technical aspects of GIS or modeling. Doesn't mean you can't when you're smaller than that. It just means that that's the region or the area where that can start happening. Now, employee turnover. This was an important issue. It was brought up to us when we were developing our survey instrument. Some of our beta testers suggested that we ask a whole battery of questions on this, and we found some really great information. By the way, the report has a full set of salary ranges, which turned out to apparently be a very useful tool to MPOs who read this report. As far as turnover, the entire MPO universe, all 385 MPOs, experienced 12.5% turnover per year. The way we found that out is we asked how many employees had left over the last 2 years, and then averaged that out over 1 year. Obviously, the period 2007 to 2009 has been an interesting time for employment, so these numbers could be a little more exaggerated. But one thing we know is that larger MPOs experience much less turnover than smaller ones. MPOs with 20 or more employees had a 4% turnover rate versus 20% for those less than 3 employees. And we think one reason for that was only pointed out after the report was finished, but we think that might be from career progression, that if an MPO has only 2 employees, you literally cannot be promoted unless your boss retires, resigns, or dies. So for a young professional coming in order to be advanced into a different level of profession, they need to move on to a different agency. When we looked at turnover, we found that as much as 40% of those working at an MPO left the transportation sector entirely. Quite a few of them left for other government jobs, but in the non-transportation area. So they might have moved over to the land use or the zoning department of the city, or to the parks department. Only 12% of departing MPO employees left for another MPO. One thing we went into this study thinking was that maybe MPO employees were attractive targets for consulting firm recruitment, and that certainly was a place that employees went. 26% went there. But it was not an overwhelming number. We found that most people were departing the MPO for other government jobs. And certain specializations were more attractive to consulting firms. Modelers and technically inclined people were a little more popular. Urban planners were in demand outside of transportation. Civil engineers were more attractive to other transportation agencies. So people left for a different variety of places. And there's some interesting stuff here if you want to track your MPO's experience at attracting and retaining employees, and in their own career progression. That brings us to the end of our throwing a massive amount of numbers at you. There's a huge number of topics in this report. It's actually pushing 100 pages. But we have a whole section on salary scales, where the MPO receives employee benefits, some information on how the MPO relates to its neighbors, their intergovernmental relations, and there's quite a bit in there about an aging workforce. I can give you a kind of scary statistic that about 1/3 of MPO directors are retiring within 5 years. A lot of that is due to the formation date of MPOs. Maybe an MPO director has been in charge since its formation in the mid-1980s, and now we're reaching the end of that person's professional career. So, like Jeff said, you can download the full report at nposurvey.com or get it from the top bar of this webcast. There's also some contact information right there. You can reach Jeff, myself, or our third co-author, Karen Segerman. She was very helpful with our case studies. And after that, we're just ready for your questions and answers. And we're scheduled to be here till 1 o'clock, but I have no problem with staying past 1 if we need to. You can feel free to hang up on us at any time. Ed, I believe you're fielding questions.
Yeah, if you would go ahead and if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the Q&A section of the web interface. And I would remind folks that if you want to get AICP credit, you need to complete an evaluation at the conclusion, and we'll put that up on the screen when we get to the end.
That's a good point, Ed, and I would remind everyone that every single person, you need to register your first, last name, and email address in order to receive the credit. We won't use it. It's just something that AICP requires.
Okay, here's a question from Richard, and it says, what were the most commonly observed professional preparation credentials for MPO employees, and how many or what percentage of employees are lawyers or hold law degrees?
We did ask that question. The results did not make it into the report because they turned out to be kind of difficult to interpret because they were we did not separate between hosted and not hosted MPOs. We can probably get a little bit better information from the battery of questions on turnover. We can say that about 3/4 of MPO employees are urban planners, hold graduate degrees in urban planning. Of course, that doesn't include administrative employees. So the remainder were largely civil engineers, a handful of communications and finance people. We only encountered 2 or 3 MPOs that had an attorney on staff. And in those cases, that was a practicing attorney. We did not ask what people's degrees were. Well, we did ask, but it was not useful to us. So.
Yeah. And I'd also I'd like to add that we were also very mindful in this survey that MPOs have complained, at least to me, that they are over surveyed. And so we were trying to be mindful of trying to make this as streamlined as possible and being as judicious as we could in what questions we would ask. But I would also add anecdotally that those MPOs that are independent have somebody, at least one on staff, with strong accounting and financial management responsibilities because they don't have the host agency to rely on for the administrative, the audit issues, the billing, and the HR responsibilities. So it was important, at least with those independent MPOs, to have at least one person on who might be a CPA or at least otherwise strongly qualified in finance.
Okay, let me mention we have quite a number of questions here, and I have some concern that there are some folks that need to leave, and I wanted to know, Jennifer, can we post the evaluation question and have people be working on that while we continue questions and answers? Okay, there we go. Thanks. Okay, here's a question now. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, in your survey, were there any MPOs who were considering changes to the hosting structure? Did you come across many of those?
Jeff, would you like to start?
Yes. The answer is yes. I mean, there were any number who indicated. We didn't actually ask that question, but they got that in the free response sections in a variety of ways. And as you can imagine, there was also a variety of reasons why they were considering such a thing to transfer. And I would also say anecdotally, since this report came out, we've received numerous emails and phone calls from MPOs around the country asking about, what would it take to become differently situated, whether that was fully independent or just switching from one host agency to another, what it would take and what's required and what our other MPOs look like. So, it's a little gratifying in that they're calling us, and I would also say that the information in the report, we are hopeful that you'll be able to go out and look at your peers and also look at those that are in a variety of other hosting arrangements to see what those advantages and disadvantages are, what their staffing requirements, what they discuss as what they need as staff, so that it helps your transition as you're considering it. Alex, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add a bit. The two reasons that were given for not becoming independent were almost uniformly the availability of capital float. That was bridging the gap between this week's paycheck and the next reimbursement from the federal government. The MPOs were unsure of where to get that money from, that they did not have a source, whether it be state DOT or local dues, to bridge that 3-month gap. And the other was funding the local match. PL funds and 5303, other federal programs, all require a 20% local match. In some states, that's taken care of by the state DOT, but in several instances, we encountered MPOs that reported an inability to raise enough local dues or local fees to claim all of their PL funds. So they were actually leaving PL money on the table because they could not raise enough match. And having a host agency solves that problem, because you can credit the value of your office space or the value of equipment and supplies towards PL funds match. So those are the two big reasons.
Right. I would also add, just to add a little bit, the flip side of that is probably the most common reason for MPOs considering change is the either the perceived or real influence over the MPO by the host agency, and that's coming often from your MPO board members who are not representing the host agency, that there's a concern that whether real or not real, there might be some influence by that host agency over the MPO process.
Okay, here's a question. How do MPOs initiate being independent from a host agency?
Good question. Actually, I don't know that this was really addressed in our survey or in our responses, but my own experience is that it generally comes from concerns on the board that there's frequently somebody on the board who is dissatisfied for whatever reason with the hosting arrangement. It does also, I think, happen when there is undue influence and the staff become uncomfortable with pressure of some sort that's being brought by the host agency. Alex, do you want to expand on that?
Just that the initiation of change, right, has come from the MPO board and almost always involves a one-time or an ongoing collection of dues from local governments. In order to change the hosting status, again, you have to come up with current funds to get through the next reimbursement period.
Okay, here's a very timely question, and there'll be a lot of folks listening to your answer to this, okay? What kind of changes are you hearing about with reauthorization for changes in MPO requirements? And I know there's been a lot of, we just had the big sea shift in the election, but notwithstanding that, I'm sure there were things that were being kicked around out there that you might be able to share.
Well, we obviously had a big change on Tuesday. We'll have a new Transportation Infrastructure Committee chairman that's the committee that will initiate the governing legislation of our MPOs. what we had heard is a move towards changing the threshold where MPOs are required to exist. Currently, that's 50,000 people. We had heard that being adjusted upwards to 100 or even 200,000. We know that there is some changes coming from the Census Bureau on how they define an urban area. That may cause more urban areas to be agglomerated with their neighbors. That would not necessarily require new MPOs or a different change, but that would substantially change the intergovernmental politics of the MPO, and they may want to institute some change on their own. We had heard that there may be some interest in having the very largest of MPOs administer design build programs, so they would function more like a mini state DOT. I'm not sure how far that proposal got. We had also seen some proposals to change the proportion of voting seats on MPO boards. A lot of this was driven by the very largest cities in the U.S., which feel underrepresented sometimes. That they wanted some weighted or proportional voting, and that's one of the reasons we asked so many questions on that topic. We found that it was of, at best, limited utility to change the composition of the board, because the point of an MPO, the point of the planning process, is to come to some kind of consensus. Jeff, anything else I missed?
No, you hit the four that I was thinking of, and the only, I guess, addition to that would be that in the definition of urban agglomeration, what it may well do is not only form a single urbanized area where there perhaps were 2, 3, or 4 of them before. And again, as Alex said, it doesn't require you to become a single MPO, but it would require you to work collectively as a TMA. So the whole area would be defined as a TMA. You might have multiple MPOs within that TMA, and for certification, federal certification purposes, you would be treated collectively as a single TMA to demonstrate that your planning process is in line with federal regulations.
Okay.
One last thing I'd throw on here is that MPO practice is governed quite a bit by regulation as well as actual legislation. So there will be another opportunity to change how MPOs do their practice during the next rulemaking, which happens usually a year and a half after a new transportation bill.
I'd also like to add that there are several states out there that have their own state statute and state regulations guiding MPO practices, and that those may also be subject to change given the results of the recent election. There may be shifts in your state assemblies or state legislatures, and the governor's position and what they want MPOs to look like or feel like. I know here in Florida, for example, there's a cap on the size of MPO boards, so you simply can't go above that cap, and that is an organizational structural issue that all MPOs in Florida deal with in accommodating board seats and also complying with state statute.
Okay, there was a question about did you get any information about a relationship between MPO staff size and the amount of work done in-house versus by an outside consultant?
I'm going to let Alex answer that.
Yes, we did. We asked a battery of questions on consultants. We did find that on average, well, actually not on average, taking the UPWPs of all of the MPOs in the survey, about a quarter of all money under MPO control is sent to consultants. Okay. We did ask a series of questions about what tasks are assigned to consultants. We were a little bit surprised. We found that consultants were being brought in, like we knew they were, for special studies. That was the most common reason to bring in a consultant. So if you're starting a bike ped plan, you're considering a new mode of transit, or if you've fallen into air quality non-attainment, something like that, the consultants were used quite often. We found that over 80% of MPOs completed their plan in-house, but sometimes with consultant supplementation. Consultants were used quite commonly for travel demand modeling and air quality modeling. We did ask a whole battery of questions on it. It's in the Chapter 5 of the report.
Okay, let me mention there are a few questions that are asking specific, details about the report. It is you can download it right now from this website, but it's also available on the CUTR website. I also want to mention that we've gone beyond 1 o'clock, and I know that many of you have other things to get to. So we may deal with another question or so, and then we're going to have to close it out. But we certainly appreciate the interest of people in this subject. And Jeff and Alex had posted their contact information, so by all means feel free to contact them afterwards. Okay. Let me just take this one last question that wonders, do MPOs often act as transit operators as well, and are there pros and cons to that?
It's not. I wouldn't say that it's common, but I would add that it isn't. It's certainly not unheard of. And I'm not really sure how to answer the pros and cons of that, specifically with the transit operation, other than I think more broadly there are some elements raised in terms of being a planning agency combined with an implementation agency, and that there may be some potential conflicts of interest in there. I think you do hear occasionally, and this may be well true of transit providers, where perhaps there would be some perception, at least, if not reality, that undue emphasis might be given in the regional plan to and maybe in the TIP for funding to transit, if both the transit and the MPO were co-located. But again, I don't think we have anything to show that that's a real issue, other than perhaps some perceived issue. Alex, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just point out that we encountered several MPOs that were operating the transportation disadvantage programs within their region, so the on-demand transit was relatively common. We found a handful of MPOs the MPO was not operating transit. What was happening is a umbrella agency had two departments. One was the MPO and one was the transit provider. So we find those examples. We pointed them out. Las Vegas, Minneapolis were two of the largest that do that. So it's not unheard of, and it's a pretty innovative situation. It could be the wave of the future. Who knows?
I would also add that sometimes we did find at least one situation in which a relatively smaller TMA had reached a point where they needed to go from on-demand transit service to fixed route bus service, and that none of the local agencies were prepared to take on that task, and so the MPO stepped in and took on that role. And so MPOs could be administratively nimble and entrepreneurial to fill a need in the transportation area in their region, and so at least this one MPO stepped up and said, okay, we'll do the transit, we'll become the transit agency as well.
Okay, look, we've gone about 10 minutes over here, and I think we need to call it to an end here. I would ask Jennifer, can you post the announcement about our next webinar 2 weeks from today? And while Jennifer's doing that, I want to thank all of you for participating. This is obviously a subject that's got a great deal of interest, and I'd certainly encourage you to be in contact with Jeff and Alex by email or by phone. I know it's a subject that they continue to work on, and will be very happy to help you with. So with that, we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. And again, thanks to all of you for participating.